First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for the beautiful works that you showed today and yesterday. Just going to mute myself on live. It takes a lot of courage to create something and to be exposed, and you are all more or less young makers. So it's also a vulnerable place where you all are, and quite exposing. So thank you so much for this. And of course, thanks to the dancers of żfinMalta, which they were incredible. Yeah, so it's always a beautiful, as a director, when these things, they go on stage. This particular project also was very singular, very different than the others. It started from an idea, and then more and more partners joined in. That's where Spazju Kreattiv, which is our main co-producer of this project, and also Valletta Cultural Agency, they decided to support the project, because we think it's very important to keep cultivating local talent, and thank you for this. Right, so Q&As, they can be quite boring. I've been in many of those, or they can be super exciting. It's kind of a process that goes both ways. And we hope to stay in the interesting part, in the interesting side. So for this specific one, I basically sent a task to the choreographers this morning. And I, instead of asking general questions about the process, I want to look at the different ways and how we can unpack a choreographic work. As you've seen tonight, all these works, they are all multi-layered. They all have a body in it. They all use some sort of costumes. They all use music. Some of them, they use text. They all use transitions. So what we're going to look and unpack, I will ask each choreographer to look at one of these elements and to see how in their work, in this particular work, they approach that particular element. So this, it might shed some lights into the process as well, and it might be interesting. Also, this is something that as żfinMalta we really love to do a lot, is that to keep, kind of give access to a process, because there is a lot of conversation out there about, oh, I like dance, but I don't understand it. And it's actually, it's not that hard to understand dance. It just takes a little bit more of effort and a lot of kind of back and forth of conversation. It's a decision-making process, like every art form. So that's what we're trying to do tonight. Yeah. All right. So we'll start. Let me just go through my notes. We start with Zoe. So we're going to go backwards. Today we've seen Zoe. We started with Deb and Julian, then we went with Gabby, and then with Zoe. So we're going to go backward, and then we'll go backward, like yesterday, and then we go into Concetta, no, sorry, Diane, and Rochelle and Concetta. Yeah. Okay, good. So Zoe, you are the first one, and you have the hard task to to tell us about score versus set material. Before you start, I just want to give the audience out there and you guys, we use a lot of specific terms in the dance world, and which can be very distracting and very sometimes confusing. So what we mean by score is a way of creating work. So the choreographer in this case gives a set of instructions to the dancer. And every night, the dancer, through that score, performs the piece, and it's going to be slightly different every night. Whereas set material, as the word says, it's material that is being set, doesn't change. There is the interpretation, of course, there is the research behind, but it's kind of set. The way this set material can be created is through tasking, which is, again, another method. But today we're going to be looking at these two ways of actually performing and the choreographer giving instructions through a score or through set material. So Zoe, how did you work?
Well, first I'm glad you explained that, because I thought score meant music. So I prepared a whole different thing to say, no. Yes, I think it should be on, yeah. No, so how did I work? We started the process the first few days improvising. We did a lot of improvisation. We were looking at stereotypes and gender stereotypes, and we were kind of breaking it down to see what we can take from that to experiment with physically. So we were looking at space and women in space and how that in our society today. And we started by doing a lot of improvisation, experimenting with literal and non-literal kinds of movement. We tried some more abstract ways of moving, and then as the process went along, we were kind of seeing which parts were interesting from this improvisation and setting material from the improvisation that we were doing. So yeah, that's how we built most of the material for this, for the piece.
Right. So basically what we've seen tonight, it's the process of you gave a lot of different tasks to the dancer, and then the dancers, through your instructions during the process, then they created the material. And what they perform, it's the same material every night?
Yeah, then
Okay.
it was set. So
Okay.
the improvisation was in the beginning of the process. Then we kind of set the material so that it's pretty much, yeah, the material is there, and then it's kind of layering on top of that. But it was a very collaborative process with both Andrea and Amber. So yeah, that's how we came about to do most of the piece, which is something that I didn't really think of from before. Like I wanted to see how it was with improvisation. Of course, that was my aim. But yeah, I was kind of open to see how we're going to make that material, and that kind of came out of that.
Okay. And in the work, the solo is roughly 16 minutes. And so in these 16 minutes, are there moments where even if it's set material, there are the dancer, in that case, can take some time to get out of the set material and go back?
Yeah, there are a few moments where it's kind of more of an idea rather than set movements, but the idea is still very the idea is set, and then what comes out of it is a bit different maybe each night. So I guess there's I wouldn't say a balance of it, because I think most of it is set, but yeah, there are these moments and the transitions between one part and the other that kind of are a bit more free.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's that's great. Do any other choreographer in either tonight or the three works yesterday, have you used more score based work, or all of you it's set?
In the interaction part in my solo, yeah, that is completely open. She has a set of score, for example. I tell her, let's say if you're going to go towards the audience, don't stay there for too long, maximum of 5 seconds, for example. And then even from the beginning till the end, she starts off where she's more insecure, then suddenly she's surprised by the audience. So the intention throughout from beginning to end is there. And then, yeah, and then she's free to play. I tell her, okay, let's say through the rehearsals, we had a lot of repetition, and each time it's completely different. And each time, let's say, I'd be like, okay, it like this, it like that. So at the end, once we managed to do a lot of times, then it sort of fell into place at the end, in a way.
Julian?
For us, it was responding to a question that we posed to the dancers for the various sections.
Mm-hmm.
And they, through improvisation, eventually set their material, but they had an invitation to, because it was very emotional charged, and if they were in the moment feeling like they wanted to do something different, to stay there a little longer, they had that availability to stay a bit longer, to express themselves in the moment differently to what they rehearsed. So they were given a lot of freedom actually to, in the moment, make certain decisions that they wanted to.
Which it's a big risk because it takes a lot of practice. It's somehow a bit more safe, if you like, when you have set material, because then you can set your rehearsals, you can go over that material. Whereas if you work just with scores, then, you know, one day the dancer can respond really well, the other day it might go completely south. So it's a huge risk. You need to really, there is a lot of trust there into the dancer you're working with. Great. So let's move into the next element of, one of the many elements of choreography. So we're going to be talking about soundscape this time, and with Gabi. So obviously soundscape is one of the essential elements, or you know, that we all think about when we create choreography. Sometimes choreography can stand on its own; it doesn't need the support of the music. In fact, actually, yesterday evening there were some moments of silence. Some solos were almost without music, so that's also a choice. So Gabi, how did you work with your soundscape, and why that particular sound, and how that informed the kind of message or the idea that you had in mind?
Right, so I always start my choreographies by first creating the movement and then adding the sound to it. So the beginning section where we see Tara lying down, we just see the choreography of the lights. That for me, we hear the soundscape of, let's say, footsteps or the train, and there are different sounds layered upon it, and the whispering as well. And that for me was already to instigate the audience to think about what actually is happening without the dancer actually moving. And that, for me, that was, okay, I'm not going to say much about what it actually was in the piece for me. But then from there, the whispers come in later on in the piece, so there's a whole relevance towards it in a way. And then I use the sound of the wind. Now I try to use something more simplistic in a way, just to create the atmosphere and the ambience that I wanted. And for the audience, to keep it more, in a way, it's all more about the movement, and just that is sort of a layer, a silent layer in a way, a minimal layer to what is actually being portrayed through the movement. But then after I saw this section quite a few times, I was like, okay, there needs to be something because it's a bit flat in a way. So then I began to play around with different percussion sounds, and I chose percussion because her movements during this section are more, in a sense, fragmented. So I didn't want anything, let's say, like a piano bass or anything like that, or classical. So yeah, I focused it more on percussion because there's a clear rhythm, and that the rhythm matched the movement that she was actually creating. And then I was like, okay, you don't always have to go with the music, you can go against it. So then we played with this also, and then from there, we go into a clear silence, and then a clear intro into a more like almost out of place music track, which feels somewhat odd at times, but it sort of went because I wanted a complete change of scenery in the choreography. I wanted her, okay, be playful with the audience, because since the piece is more about vulnerability, I wanted a sudden change and a sudden like put on the spot feeling. And then yeah, we were playing with the idea of the humor with the music as well. And then we refer back to the whispering, and the whispering came back as an essence of, okay, she's reflecting back into the beginning of the track, of the piece. And that for me was like, she's reflecting in her past. So she's reflecting into vulnerable moments in her past, coming back into it, and how she's reacting to that. And then the whispering sustains itself, but it's not as obvious throughout the whole track. And then, yeah, and then there's more percussion. So then I use the percussion as a sense to complement the movement that Tara was, you know what I mean? And then from there we went into the final track, which was the vocal track. And the vocal track, okay, it was like a normal voice and my voice actually recording it, but then I didn't want it to be a humanistic voice because Tara was not actually a human voice, so it almost sounded more like a childlike voice, if you want to say. And that I layered it with more of an eerie essence, and the eerie essence complemented with the more baby-like voice that was it gave like a twisted feel to it, I felt. And that is something that I wanted to create in a way, because it was more about related to the psyche of it all. So it was like, okay, is she jolly? Is she messed up mentally? You know, does she need some, you know? So yeah, I played with these ideas in it in a way, yeah.
Nice. So clearly the soundscape played a huge role into the creation as well as the actual piece. Great. And do we want to, any other solo that really the music was an essential element, that it went hand in hand with your process? Maybe Zoe or, yeah? Or
yeah, I think it did. So firstly, my brother did the music. Who's
beautiful, beautiful music, thank you.
And yeah, it did, because I kind of thought about the ambience and the kind of vibe that I want to go throughout the piece. So, for example, in the beginning, I wanted something that was a bit more repetitive and something that's almost a bit sounding sarcastic in a way, or yeah, ironic. I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah, something that's repetitive, which is kind of these stereotypes that have been repeated throughout all these years, and we still see them and hear them today. So it's this like, so I wanted something like that. And for the there was actually a second piece of music in the middle, but we decided to keep the second section in the middle section in silence, because I felt like, also from talking with you and to my dramaturg, it was a lot. And it was kind of nice also to have a part in silence, to hear or to see a more human side of in this case, Andrea or Amber. And in the last section, I wanted to envisage something that's more idealistic or more dreamy in a way, something that's has more space, or yeah, this idea that everyone has equal space and is comfortable in their own space without outside sources telling you to take less space. So I wanted something that yeah, and the music has this quality as well, this like space, see. Yeah.
Sounds like the music is it's again one of those elements that you are using for transitioning. Is one of those tools that really helps the piece to glue together, which we'll talk with Rochelle later on about transitions.
Do you mind if I add something?
Please, go ahead.
With the soundscape, I don't know if I'm heard.
Yes, I think yeah.
So, for example, one transition was that the sound is infiltrating like from far away, because the song that I used, I Put a Spell on You, is all about deceiving, is all about, you know, like trapping. So how can I do it in a transparent way? And how can I not make it like so obvious? So there the sound is not only the choice of the song, but what I worked with Niels was that, for example, the song comes out from a box, and it already, okay, then it's heard, then it makes its impact, but then maybe it's the choice of the performer to put it back again in the box. So how to create a transition with sound to actually enhance your statement. Stop.
Thank you. Great. All right. So we'll move now into the next big element that choreography needs. Not every time, but sometimes, which is the body. And in this case, we've seen always one body on stage. Sometimes we see two, sometimes we see 100, multiple bodies on stage. And of course, when a choreographer works with the body, there is a lot of meaning that arises from this body. If it's a male, a female, it has a different gender, the race background, everything has already a meaning for the audience that is receiving the work. So the task of the choreographer, of course, is that to work with that meaning and understanding how that can enhance or maybe not the work. So we are going to, and in this case also we have trained bodies, which is even more complicated, because a normal body doesn't know to, you know, if you ask a dancer to just do a simple gesture with the arm, their training over the years, you know, they come up with beautiful movement, and maybe sometimes choreographers don't want beautiful movement. That's why you have choreographers that actually work with untrained bodies. But in this case, you all work with overly trained bodies, so that's also another task for you. But let's concentrate on Deb and Julian. So how did you, because your concept was very clear and actually really relevant. So can you tell us how did you work with Amber or Andrea, and how did you translate that concept into these young bodies that are trained, that are female bodies, and was it hard?
So for us, given that, can I be heard? Can I be heard? Hello? Yes. Hello, hello, okay. So for us, given that the theme was about a woman who experienced forced migration, it was very important that our main intention was to create the space through the piece to evoke empathy, connection. So our process was, rather than Andrea and Amber, the technique of the body being the means to an end, it was, we tried to focus on the internal process. So, and given that Andrea and Amber are very different people, their individual process was also very different. So that was very fascinating to experience from beginning to end, their personal transition as well. So our main idea was, as Joe mentioned earlier, was to start with giving a task. And in the beginning, it was interesting to observe how they each experienced it, but our main focus was guiding them on what, how does your emotion guide your movement, rather than how does your movement guide your emotion. As we really wanted to really bring it down to when you're feeling desperate, where do you feel this? Are you like this? If you're feeling like you cannot handle something anymore, you're really in struggle, where do you feel that? How is it expressed in your hands? If you're feeling helpless, you know, it was all bringing out all these elements. So as you were saying, Paolo, before, because they have the technical training, it was really about like trying to unlayer that. So if I'm going to lift my leg, rather than how does it look, if I'm feeling like this, how will I lift my leg, right? So for example, there was a section where the main emotion was desperation of tonight at Amber. There's a point where she lifts her leg and then she flops on the floor. So rather than where it's lifting it to look, it was like she's really trying to help herself get up, but she cannot. She's really in that place. So I think to sum up, it was, what does it mean for you, and how do you tell your story through how you move? Yeah. Yes.
So, as our dramaturg, Thomas Schaup, really kind of told us, when we first explained what we were doing, he was like, but you know, their language is the body and their language is technique. So actually what you're wanting is something very different to what they're used to giving. So we started talking a lot about what are the ingredients of this. So we spoke about dynamics, and we kind of worked our way in from using the language of the body, exploring dynamics like, you know, push, pull, throw, sink, melt, and then what emotions relate to that. So we started where they were, and what was fascinating was the progression over the 4 weeks, where in the beginning we're like, oh, we don't feel much watching them. But it was, I mean, and they're so generous, both dancers were able to go there, but every week it just kept going deeper and deeper and deeper, because we kept asking questions, reflecting this conversation back and forth about what it means for them and what we see as outsiders, what it makes us feel watching them do something. So this idea of the assumption that the audience don't understand dance, don't know anything about dance, and as an audience who goes through feelings of fear, of excitement, of loss, of hope, of hopefulness, what will they be able to recognize watching the person on stage? These were always things we kept asking.
Thank you. That's yeah. That's very. It must have been a really beautiful process. That's great. Do we want to add anything regarding the body? Because some of you have worked with female bodies, and some with all trained, some others with the male bodies. Did you, when you started, was your wish? You were like, because I gave you the dances to work, and maybe when you receive the cast, you're like, oh, I wish I could work with a female body, or vice versa. So, how for the people that work with the male dancers, how did you go? Was
yes, I actually wanted to work with a male dancer, because I was coming from working on myself, on my own solo. So actually I was really interested to see how it is different to work on a male body. Because as you were mentioning before, the moment it's a female or a male, it's a big statement in terms of gender. So yeah, I wanted somehow to work on the body itself, and I felt that working on a male body would somehow be more neutral in terms of gender issues. So it would kind of remove that from the equation. And then during the process, what came out was actually that the body was like bringing out different layers of the person itself. So it was not anymore about, okay, it's a male or it's a female, but that's actually it's this specific person with these specific layers, as I was exploring the physical body, the emotional body, the mental body. So how this specific person approaches these layers was then really specific, and it's not only about the dancer and the performer, but actually the person, what brings in these layers.
Thank you. Thanks, Concetta. So let's move into the next element, which is oftentimes used in choreography, which is text. And we've seen today we had a bit of text, and also yesterday. And we'll talk about text with Diane, because I've seen also your previous works, and this is an element that you like to be present in your work. So how does text enhance your work, and why is there, and how do you use it?
For this piece in particular, I think I would say that the whole piece actually revolved around the text, in the sense I was working on a person's internal dialogue. And myself personally, when I do have an internal dialogue, I actually hear my voice and sometimes a different voice. And which was actually quite, I took it for granted, and I assumed that it was the same experience for everyone until I started researching, and I found that some people cannot hear any voice. So they process things maybe with images, you know, but they don't hear a verbal voice in their head, which confused me. Because I couldn't relate, which made me dig even deeper. And I actually found some research where a scientist actually came up with a technique called autobiographical reasoning, where he was documenting people's internal thoughts. Sometimes the most random thoughts, you know, thoughts that happen halfway through a conversation, which you would never say, because it would either get you into trouble or get you fired or make you feel uncomfortable or ashamed, whatever. And he gave a task to certain clients, and you know, gave them specific times of days. They had like a timer and the ticker, and whenever it would ring, they would jot down these random thoughts. And I found that concept really, really interesting. So I teamed up with a writer. And I had a process with the performers. I wanted to create a piece on them, you know, for them, on them, based entirely on their internal dialogue. So step one was, do you actually, you know, hear your own voice or someone else's voice? Because had they said no, it would have changed the whole concept. Luckily, they said yes. So they actually, you know, documented these very random thoughts they had. And then with a writer, we actually created a full narrative. Step 2, well, step 2, 3, 4, 5, would be how are we going to translate this on stage. So I wanted to invite the audience in, you know, into their psyches, into their, you know, I wanted them to hear both sides of the story. And I often found, and I discussed this with the dancers, that very often there's a trigger. So something happens, I read something, I see something, I hear something, and that triggers this internal debate. And that's exactly the way we worked with the dancers. I was very lucky. I had two very, very different dancers, both physically, both personality-wise. I mean, they were literally chalk and cheese. And, but it's true. So once the script was actually devised, I made them record the whole script in both their voices. So Keith recorded the whole script, and Mathieu recorded the whole script, and then I picked sections and put them together in the soundtrack. So every time the performer is dancing, he can hear both sounds. So he hears his voice and, in this case, the other dancer's voice. And I wanted to try and invite, you know, the audience to experience the same thing. So in my case, the text was really embedded in the whole soundscape. We also used text to create the trigger. So we hear sections, news feeds from a BLM protest. We also hear the American police officers' press conference. We hear their girlfriend who's trying to call him, you know, so there's always a trigger and then this rabbit hole in their head where you start, you know, debating. And yeah, so I really think it played an integral role because of the concept of the piece.
Thanks, Diane. Thank you. That's anyone that used text that wants to add or had it was used in a different way, because this is clearly it's yeah, it's quite an essential element of the work.
Yes, I use text for the first time in a different way than I normally do. I don't use text so much actually, but I saw that with Felix it was a strength, and I played with it, and it evolved in an interesting way, and it also evolved in this kind of dialogue that was happening. So there was a recorded sound, and his sound being speech spoken live. So this was a first time for me. Like, you have to choreographically time the timing of what is happening in terms of text. And yeah, it's quite uniform, but I see that it has an effect. And something maybe to elaborate on. It was the first time that I used text in this way.
Cool. All right, Rochelle, we stay with you. Someone was, no. We stay with you. We go into the next, one of the many elements again, which is the transitions. Now, all these elements we've been talking about, soundscape, text, they can all be used as a transition. So you can use any device, any theater device, like a blackout, and then suddenly a light comes in and there is a transition. And I feel as though that in your solo, like in everyone, there are some beautiful intuitions that sometimes they really becomes concrete. How did you work with this idea of transition? Because your solo is also, it's kind of, it's a micro journey of someone that decides concretely to do an action, and then we see how this develops.
Yeah, so for me, I think for all of us actually, a transition can really make or break a piece or a complete set. So the way that I started the process was I went into this Vassalli hall, this blank canvas, and I had one point in the whole map. And this one point, I call it the point of no return. So I didn't know how it will evolve, but this point of no return, I knew for sure that it had to be that a device or a technological meltdown happens. And I spoke to my dramaturg about this. So this was like one of the main transitions that I knew would happen with a breakout. And like you said, transitions could be music, light, escaping the space, or something entering the space. And so I said, okay, I know that I have this concrete for sure. What could be, so I had this map, what could be what builds up to this point and what builds up to that point. So I started to create with Felix and Pearl a series of images or a series of states. And it's a matter of trial and error. You don't know what is going to come before or after. And you start to get the essence. Okay, the essence is strong here, I keep it. No, this is not authentic to the concept, so I don't keep it. And then the things that you keep as sections, so for instance, for me it was 7 different sections in the whole piece of this canvas that I see in the beginning, which is the map and the point. I work a lot with graphs. And then I start to say, okay, how can I link seamlessly one thing to the other without making it obvious? Because for me this is really important. I prefer that something is subtle so that the audience, you know, can really tune in the work and not be, you know, so alarmed with a sudden change or with a sudden infiltration of another atmosphere or state. So yeah, I worked with this point, which maybe some people that saw yesterday was I call it the blackout, but which is when the device is without battery. And anything could be coming before. It was maybe the birthday of Tara, which got missed, but it could be a recipe, it could be anything else. But how to link what comes before this point and after. And I was thinking what is happening after as transition is something that speaks about the objective of the persona is not the same anymore as it was in the beginning. So we see someone in the beginning which is on his daily routine maybe, and, you know, quite relaxed, but something triggers that this persona is in a stress mode or is in a mode which is maybe not his normal state. So this for sure would come as a transition afterwards. But I was not knowing in the beginning how it would be as a puzzle. Yeah, I would say transitions are really challenging for the choreographer, really challenging. But I find a lot of pleasure in it. Sometimes I spoke with Felix for like 2 hours just for one transition, but it was helpful because it's a provocation to really understand what is genuinely that you want to stay, that you want to say in your artistic work. So.
Yeah, and it's exactly that. It's how can you still don't get lost and then suddenly the transition brings you back and you're like, oh my God, this is exactly what I needed for what I'm saying. And it's, again, a lot of try this or this doesn't work. And sometimes the transition just happens.
Yeah, sometimes when it's
and you're like, oh my God, that's it just happened.
That's a gift.
Yeah.
But sometimes also, like when you came to give feedback, a transition could be also taking out something. Because sometimes it could be so overlayered that you are too lost and you don't get the essence of it. So you have to let something fall.
Yeah.
And that's also maybe, I think, transition in progress rather than transition in what's happening.
There is a beautiful lecture on YouTube about this actually by William Forsythe, which is the aesthetic of removal. And he talks a lot about how removing in a choreographic work, and it trains the dancers also to think about how can I remove rather than keep adding. It's really interesting. Guys, we can stay here for hours, but we only have 4 more minutes to touch on the last element before we open to questions. So, Concetta, this is one of the favorites. Obviously, we in order to have choreography, we need to have the essential element, which is movement. Without movement, we don't have anything. So it's a combination of really time and space. And how did you work with movement? Movement is a language when dance makers are like, oh, it's a language. But what is for you movement? How did you work with movement in this specific work?
Yes, so first of all, let's say that the movement was coming from a state. So we first worked on how to kind of build this state, so how we can enter this state of actually listening, where the movement is arising from an inner impulse. So first we worked on just finding this place with different practices and different exercises. And it was a way for the dancer to actually connect with himself, as I was saying earlier, with all the layers of his being. And then we started to work on the tools. So we kind of starting to narrow down through tasks what was actually the objective of how to find the movement. So the movement was not just finding the movement for the sake of the movement, but it was actually in relation to something else. So actually the movement came out from the relation to some other tools. So for example, we were exploring the tool of breath. We focused on that. We had sessions on that, and then the movement came out from the tool of breath. So actually it was a relation with focusing on breath, or focusing on vocalization, or focusing on stillness. So it was always an outcome of this relation with something else, not only from the movement itself. Okay, let's create a movement. So we had this state at the beginning of listening, and then we added the tools that had this relation with movement. And then, of course, each body, because I was exploring the physical, the emotional, the mental, each body had then different images. So then on top of that, we started to layer with the images or an atmosphere that certain scene could have, and that brought in intentions which started to change then the movement itself. So that was the way we built the movement. But then a big part of it was actually to add the intention, or what is the atmosphere that we want to build. And it changed then the whole, sometimes it even changed the movement itself. So, and in fact, I found myself saying many times to the dancers that for me it's not so important the specific movement, but it's more important the intention that is behind.
I guess this is a common thing also for Deb, for everyone, that you all work really with you start from an intention, and sounds like the intention was the source, whereas sometimes some choreographers work with, as you said, breath. But sometimes the source was indeed an idea. So how can you translate that idea, and then the movement appears? I think one thing that I always do when I go to the theater or I watch something that is dance, I always ask myself how these dancers move on stage, and why they move that way, and what makes them move. And I'd like to, through the piece, then this question keeps popping up. And I think it's, if dance makers, they can be coherent with these questions, that's where you have a very beautiful, solid work. Do you want to add anything? I mean, I know that there is a lot here that we touched, but before we open up to the live audience online and you here, all of you here, anything else regarding movement and how you work with this essential element?
Yeah, well, I actually used different techniques throughout the piece. So, for example, in the very beginning, I wanted to focus on the relationship between the performer and their mobile phone, you know. And the whole intention in the beginning is what happens to your body when something keeps drawing you towards it and keeps pulling you towards it, and you are trying to fight it, you know. So the task was actually very simple, you know. There's a force in the middle of the stage. This force is trying to drag you towards it, and you just want to fight it. Where will that take you? How are we going to, you know, contrast it? And with such a simple, in a way, concept, this idea of pull, we managed to create a 4-minute vocabulary, you know. So sometimes a starting point, which looks like the most simplistic thing, obviously since they are trained dancers and they already have a history of vocabulary and an interpretation which is completely different, you know, you can build so much material just from one simple concept. So I think that's really interesting.
Nice. Okay, we have the last 13 minutes, 1-3, for questions, and it would be great to get some questions from you here or the people online, or I can keep asking questions. I mean, I don't mind that. No one? Let's see, someone on Facebook wants to ask anything. Yes, yes. I can pass the mic, just a second. No, I mean, don't keep it close. So.
It's quite interesting, actually, to hear more about the relationship you've created with the dancers, because you were given different dancers, many of whom probably you've seen, but you didn't have that working relationship with them. How did it work? The short span of time to get it. I mean, Diane already mentioned a bit that she had to change a couple of things, but it will be interesting to hear more about the conversation and how they fed into the piece and what you got from them as well, because obviously with dance that's very interesting always. So thank you.
You have the mic.
Yes. Can I leave now? So, yes, it was quite a little time, short time. The way that it evolved, because it's always like a development, was that we see that there is text and we like build up on it, but from rehearsal to rehearsal, I see images, I write them down, and I go back the day after, and I don't give all the image to the dancer, because if I do, he will replicate what I say, of course. And this is the missing out of what other options could be. So the dialogue that was happening mostly between me and Felix was that, okay, I just give an essence, I just give a task or a game, and how this could maybe end to the image that I am seeing, and then, okay, how can I add it to this image or not image? But I don't know if that is answering your question, but it's, yeah, I tried not to give exactly what I am trying to go for. And I found a lot of joy in that. And I was lucky because my dancers were quite responsive in that. Because sometimes I have worked with people in other working contexts where they really need to be doing exactly what they're told. And this is okay for some people, of course, but for me it's much more interesting to have much more of you know, colorful inputs. And then I pick up what is suiting more the statement of what I want to share.
Yeah,
yes.
Sorry, you sure? Yeah, I actually had an experience which surprised me in the sense I had two dancers, one who I actually knew very well, and one dancer who I didn't know at all. So a complete blank canvas versus someone I thought I really knew. The interesting is that I was far more challenged by the person I didn't know rather than the person I knew well. You know, it's when we work in the manner we work, it becomes such a collaborative process that the lines were, in my case, almost become very blurred, you know, of what my role is and what their role is. You know, they don't only give movement vocabulary, but they challenge your intentions, you know. They get into every scene and want, you know, get so involved, not only physically, but sometimes mentally, you know, and then it depends on the characters. Keith, for example, is very, you know, very regal. He will follow instructions, he will deliver them, you know, to 100% of his ability, and that it kind of starts and ends there, you know. Mathieu will need to feel involved, you know, and will need to feel the intentions you are trying to portray. And I don't know, he might decide that the task you are giving him is not going to relay, you know, the feeling you are trying to give. And and then this whole debate between, you know, choreographer and dancer starts, which is actually really interesting, because sometimes I went in thinking I knew exactly what I'm going to get out of the session. 2 hours passed and I'm like, this did not go the way I intended it, but it's actually, you know, given me a whole new perspective to work on. So it becomes, yeah, it's really interesting, you know, and I kept seeing things changing every day. And I'm like, it wasn't like that yesterday. Yes, but I really feel it works like this. So, and then it's like, where do you draw the line? You know, and then there comes a cutoff point where you say, okay, now we are structuring. You know, so it becomes a real ongoing relationship between us and them, which I actually really enjoyed, because I feel I learned like an immense amount in these 5 weeks, which was amazing. So, yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, Eric, we have another question.
In relation to what you were saying, I was wondering, how did the collaboration with the dramaturg fit into this already quite challenging and obviously interesting relationship with the dancers?
For me, it was, so I enter again the canvas space and I have this point of no return, blackout, and I was working with 2 dramaturgs, with Andrea Juice and with Thomas Schwab. One of them was online, Thomas, because he couldn't make it. He was meant to come here originally. So he was more involved towards the end of the process. And with Andrea, I feel, okay, he was there during the process, but also in the beginning. So I had a lot of time to dialogue with him. Listen, I want to speak about dataism. I want to speak about technology. And of course, my forte is not in script writing or in story making. I'm good with images. I am okay with this. How can you help me with this? It's like, that's not the role of the dramaturg, but let's discuss and see what are your main intentions. So I explained that I wanted to really have a resolution which is with the body, not with technology. I feel that it's an emphasis that should be really, I don't want to say, yeah, it's the only way, but you know, I want to bring awareness about that. So there is this point of no return, and with the help of the dramaturg, there was this maybe like source of inspiration or source of beginning point with, let's say, he asked me to watch certain films or to go into certain material. I already had my own baggage, but it, you know, he maybe had a point which makes it more direct. And from there it led like to myself writing with the dancer, of course, also a certain kind of storyline or a plot, which maybe later on could be juxtaposed further, but at the moment it's quite linear, I would say. But okay, I'm thinking too much for it. But it's something that, you know, yeah, maybe it's just a baby for now, and I would like to see it grow. And the help with the dramaturg was in this sense to see what maybe are the hurdles that come after this point, what is the introduction that I would like to give, and what is the end for now. Well, in the beginning it was only me and the dramaturg, but then, let's say towards the second week onwards, I explained to them this map that I see. I didn't say all again, but there it was really beautiful to see that there is a common point that could come together. And towards the end of the process, also the dramaturg was coming in the space, and there we could maybe work on some points that make the curve or the linearity in the curve stronger. I'm so mathematical, I realize, when I speak. But yes.
We have only 2 minutes, so if we have any question from the live Facebook, people watching from wherever they are, or from here, otherwise we'll wrap it up. I guess that's it. Okay, so, Julian.
Oh, no.
You were going to say something?
Thank you.
Okay, I just want to say before we close, thank you, thanks so much. We have 2 more performances tomorrow and Sunday. Tomorrow is the first run, which was on Thursday, and on Sunday is the run that you've seen today. We also have the option of people watching the performance online. You can go at creativita.org. Is that correct?
Yes.
Oh yes, I made it. Yeah, and for obviously, if you want to get to know the work of these young makers, follow them on Instagram or on Facebook, please, because this is literally an opera prima. It's the first work for some of them. For others, might not be, but you want to carry on and follow their journey. Also, I just want to say thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thanks to the partners. This is a żfinMalta production, but of course in co-production with Spazju Kreattiv and the Valletta Cultural Agency, which has been incredibly helpful in providing all the resources that we needed. So, and we're very lucky that we can still actually here in Malta go on stage. So thank you so much, and yeah, see you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.